pleasure to introduce Dr. David Buss. After completing his doctorate in 1981 at the University of California, Berkeley, Dr. Buss spent 4 years as an assistant professor at Harvard. In 1995, he migrated to the University of Michigan, where he taught for 11 years before accepting his current position at the University of Texas in 1996. His primary research interests include the evolutionary psychology of human mating strategies, conflict between the sexes, prestige, status, and reputation, as well as the emotion of jealousy in particular, and work on homicide and anti-homicide defenses, in addition to some work, particularly with Josh Dudley, on stalking. So please help me welcome David Buss.
Thank you, Todd. It's lovely to be here. A great honor to see old friends and meet new friends. Before I start my talk, though, I just want to say I really have loved this session this morning. All the talks were fantastic, and I just would like everyone to thank Todd and Virgil for organizing such a terrific conference. I think my talk actually nicely follows several of the other talks that we've heard, Randy Nessie's last night, Jerry Wakefield's, and Randy Thornhill's in particular. And I've been friends with Jerry Wakefield for a long time, and I told him that we have to settle our conceptual disputes using trial by combat in the future. So I want to talk about the issue of whether jealousy is pathological, and using Jerry Wakefield's definition of a disorder, he invokes two primary criteria, as he mentioned. One is that the mechanism, and this is the key evolutionary criterion, that the mechanism is not functioning as it was designed to function. You know, just like if you have a kidney that's failing or a liver that's failing, that's a disordered kidney or liver. We want to apply the same logic to psychology. So with jealousy, though, in order to understand or figure out when it's pathological, we have to understand what its design function is. And so I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about its design function, or what I think its design function is, and what the evidence points to. But I'm going to go through that relatively quickly because many of you are familiar with it. In fact, at least half a dozen people in this room have published articles on the topic, including Todd Shackelford and some of our early work that we did on the topic of jealousy. But then I want to focus on some of the difficulties with figuring out whether it is pathological or reflects the normal functioning of this mechanism. So just to sort of introduce this, it's a fascinating emotion, and it reflects, you get it linked to two very powerful things. One is love on the one hand. This is St. Augustine, he that is not jealous is not in love. But it's also linked with extreme violence. So this is a quote from O.J. Simpson. Let's say he said this to a reporter, it's published in Newsweek. Let's say I committed this crime, the killing of his wife. Even if I did do that, which of course he didn't because he's innocent, I think he's still looking for the killer actually, or will when he gets out of jail. It would have been because I loved her very much, right? So now this is odd, where you have an emotion, in this case, simultaneously in the same person, linked with love and likely intense rage. So why did jealousy evolve? So here's what I want to argue, and this won't surprise anybody who's familiar with the evolutionary work, that jealousy has a primary function to prevent infidelity. I was chatting actually yesterday with Randy Thornhill, and part of my interest in this book in this topic was launched by reading some of his work on insects. He published a book with John Alcock in 1983 called The Evolution of Insect Mating Systems, in which he proposed a taxonomy of insect mate guarding tactics. And as I went through them, I said, boy, humans do this? Concealing the attractant signals of females? Check. Jostling other males away? Check. Trying to monopolize the time and geographical space of the female? Check. So I owe Randy a big thanks for turning me on to that topic from a distance. I don't think he knew that I was getting into this at that time. And for men, as most of you know, they're given mama's baby, papa's maybe, the paternity uncertainty problem. This is going to be a sex-specific adaptive problem that we think jealousy is going to solve, and consequently misdirected parental investment. You don't want to be spending 2 decades of your life investing in an intersexual rival's offspring if you can help it. The least most of us have descended, well, anyway, we won't get into that issue. That gets us into some of Todd's work on sperm competition. Drive off mate poachers, prevent abandonment, so in other words, prevent defection from the relationship, but also signaling love and commitment. So there's some pretty good evidence that people, if their partner, especially early in the relationship, if they perceive that their partner has zero jealousy, they perceive that as a cue that their partner is not in love with them or not committed to them. And women in particular, there's at least one study that suggests a sex difference in this, are likely to intentionally evoke jealousy in their partners, which is very easy to do because of the male sexual overperception bias. All women have to do is smile at another man. Man thinks, oh, she's sexually interested in me, so he starts making approach attempts, and then that evokes jealousy in the husband. So one smile is triggering these 2 separate evolved mechanisms of males who are helpless in defending themselves against this sort of thing. So now, one of the interesting things is, so I think that it is an evolved emotion. When I started studying it and looked at the literature, the published psychological literature, jealousy was viewed as a character defect, a pathology, etc. And it turns out there's a very large psychiatric literature on pathological jealousy. And it goes under different names. The Othello syndrome, after the Shakespeare play. Conjugal paranoia is another one. But they're all delusional jealousy. They're all basically more or less synonyms that refer to these pathological symptoms. And from an evolutionary point of view, of course, we might question whether it serves some important function. So the literature is documented. My lab and a bunch of other labs have documented design features that point to jealousy being a fairly finely sculpted adaptation that is evoked in very specific circumstances. So one is and most people probably are familiar with that line of work, so I won't mention it, is the sex differences, where because of the paternity uncertainty problem, which men face and women don't face, we expect that men's jealousy will focus very intensely on the sexual contact that his partner has with another man, because that is the act that's going to jeopardize paternity certainty. Whereas for women don't face that adaptive problem, but they do face other adaptive problems like risking the loss of time, attention, resources, all of which could get diverted from a woman to a rival woman and her offspring. So we predict some sex differences there. Cues to infidelity. Todd and I did some work a long time. I think it was one of the first projects that we did together on looking at cues to sexual and emotional infidelity. So we would expect jealousy to be responsive to cues, in some cases cues that are differentially diagnostic of a sexual versus an emotional infidelity. Value of the mate, and I think Yael's mentioned that she has a poster out which has some very cool findings on precisely that. And in an early paper that Todd and I published on mate retention tactics in married couples, in fact, that we found sex-differentiated predictors of the intensity of mate retention, namely that a woman's physical appearance and her age predicted. So basically, men married to young, physically attractive women engage in more intense mate retention efforts, whereas those variables are not predictors of women's mate guarding or mate retention of men, but his income and his status striving predict the intensity of women's mate retention tactics. And so we have again, these are design features that point to a very specialized mechanism that is evoked under particular circumstances. Mate value discrepancies is something that Todd and I also looked at, and y'all mentioned that she has findings that are also suggest that mate value discrepancy, so a 6 mated to an 8, that's going to predict jealousy. Sexual difficulties, this is a really interesting one. And there's, maybe I'll mention that when I get into some of the pathological issues. And then the quality of rivals. So in a couple of studies, we showed that jealousy is, again, evoked differently in men and women, dependent upon the qualities of their intersexual rivals, such that women's get jealousy about rivals. The rivals they consider a threat get predicted by if the rival's more attractive, and I can't remember, was it more sexually adept, or maybe that wasn't one. But men's jealousy gets triggered if their rivals have higher resource prospects, better financial prospects, better jobs, etc. So all these suggest a number of design features that suggest that it is devoted to solving these pivotal adaptive problems that I listed earlier. Okay, so I don't have to mention that. It's just a kind of everyone intuitively understands what the issue is. I'll mention, so I already mentioned the cues. I just want to mention one study done by another former student of mine, Barry Cooley, which I'm very fond of this study. I thought it was very clever. And there's this reality show, I don't know if it's still on or not, called Cheaters. And what he did is he got videotapes of all of the episodes of Cheaters. And then in Cheaters, it's a reality show where what you do is if you suspect your partner is cheating, you basically can go and hire a private detective who will then monitor your partner. And then what happens in a number of cases, the detective will call up the suspicious person and say, hi, we have your partner down here. I've observed him going into the no-tell motel with someone else. Do you want to come down and confront your partner? And so then a certain number do. They say yes. That enrages them. They want to confront their partner. And what he did is he coded the verbal interrogations that men versus women wanted to know about. And basically what he found is, again, this interesting sex difference where the first thing men want to know is, did you have sex with him? They probably didn't phrase it quite like that. And the women wanted to know, do you love her? Okay, so again, in this real behavior, which is what I like about this is we can't do that experimentally. I can't bring in people into the lab and expose them to an infidelity scenario. When I first started doing this research, I talked to a colleague of mine then in Michigan, a guy named Norbert Schwartz, is a well-known psychologist, and I said, I'm about to do some work on jealousy. And he said, I tried to do some of that when I was at the University of Illinois, and what I did is I was piloting the project, brought a couple in, man and a woman, and I put the man in one room with a speaker so he could listen to the conversation I was having with his wife. I brought the wife into the other room, and on the way in, I instructed her to respond to my questions in a seductive tone of voice. And so the husband's here, and so in this first couple that he piloted, basically the husband burst through the door and punched the experimenter in the face. And so he couldn't do the study. It evoked too powerful an emotion. So anyway, that's why I like Barry's study, is because it's actual, real people engaging in real infidelity. So now, when is jealousy pathological? Strange case of the Christmas tree light synchrony. So this is a case that has appeared in the psychiatric literature. A man on Christmas Eve looked out of his living room window and observed that the neighbor across the street had Christmas tree lights that were blinking in synchrony with the white tree that his wife had set up. And this came to light because the wife said, you are just loony. And so she brought him into a shrink, and the psychiatrist diagnosed him as having pathological jealousy, delusional jealousy. Well, it turned out she was having an affair, and she was having an affair with that specific neighbor. So what's interesting is clearly, or presumably, there's a delusional component to this, right? I'm sure it's technically possible to create Christmas tree light synchrony, but odds are probably low that it occurred. But somehow he was picking up on other cues that led him to the correct inference, even though he was perhaps mistaken about the Christmas tree lights. So now here, if you look at the published literature on, well, how does the psychiatric field and clinical psychology, how do they evaluate jealousy? Well, these are common ones. So this is taken from anyway, I don't know how to pronounce his name. You can read it. But these are criteria. It says it takes up a lot of time is being consumed with jealous concerns, perhaps even some rumination. Difficulty in putting the concerns out of mind, impairment to the relationship, limiting the partner's freedom, and checking on the partner's behavior. And then here's another set. Common symptoms that they say: accusing the partner of looking or giving attention to other people, questioning the partner's behavior, interrogation of phone calls, including wrong numbers, accidental phone calls, other forms of communication, going through the partner's belongings, always asking where the partner is and who they are with, and isolating the partner from family and friends. So this is how they do it. And a large number, I don't know what the numbers are, because if you go to the DSM, if you go to the DSM and you look up jealousy and look up pathological jealousy, it's changed a little bit, but it's just like a minor thing. I think the latest one is it falls under paranoia. So paranoia, jealousy, delusional type, or something like that. So I think there are 6 difficulties with this issue. 6 difficulties of distinguishing normal functioning of the jealousy mechanism from when it's pathological. So this is the first one. Behaviors overlap, those critical symptoms overlap, I think perfectly. I haven't gone through every single one, but with our mate retention inventory. It's part of what people do in the function of mate retention. And when they get suspicious, yes, they start checking on their partner's email, checking their cell phone, checking on their Facebook page to see, what kind of contact they've had, etc. So these look like just normal mate guarding behaviors. The second is an issue that several people have mentioned, including Randy Nesse, the signal detection problem, and that is that infidelities are cloaked in great secrecy. And this was first, you don't need a PhD to know that, but I think people don't realize how important that is. So if you go back even to the classic Kinsey studies, 1948, 1953, the classic Kinsey studies, the question about infidelity caused more people to withdraw from participation in the study. And for those who remained, it was the question that most people did not want to answer. So we can guess that the actual rates of infidelity are higher than the reported rates in the actual study. So we know infidelity is cloaked in great secrecy, and we know there are good reasons for that. I think there's been a co-evolutionary arms race of infidelity, because infidelity is advantageous under certain conditions for both men and women for somewhat different reasons. And it's bad for their partner, though. So there's co-evolution of jealousy and infidelity. Infidelity gets driven underground. Jealousy gets more and more sensitive and more specific in its design features to detect ever more subtle and muted signals. Let's see, did I get then there's the on-average effectiveness problem, which most people are probably familiar with. Lita Cosmides and John Tooby talked about it in one of their articles in Journal of Abnormal, I think about 10 or 15 years ago. But that's it. Adaptations are designed to solve problems on average, and there are many instance failures. So if your liver fails, that doesn't mean that the liver is not an adaptation. There are many instance failures. So we have to look at on average success of adaptations, not whether they fail in particular instances. Related to that is that jealousy is predicted by statistical predictors even when there's no current jealousy. So I mentioned mate value discrepancies, the sexual difficulties. These populate the psychiatric literature of people who are diagnosed as having pathological jealousy. So basically, erectile dysfunction, okay, or orgasmic problems on the part of the woman, dissatisfaction on the part of the woman or perceived dissatisfaction by the men that the woman is not sexually satisfied, because he thinks, well, if I'm not, she must be having an affair. She doesn't want to have sex with me, and so she must be having an affair because she's getting sex from somewhere else. So even if she's not, it's a statistical predictor, and it's actually probably a statistical predictor in ring doves, believe it or not. So ring doves, basically, they get together, and if the sex doesn't work or if the conception doesn't work, that's the single biggest predictor of divorce in ring doves. The same thing might occur in humans. Statistically, it is a predictor. But anyway, all these guys get diagnosed as having delusional jealousy, and women too, by the way. There are others I didn't mention, so interest from potential pushers. There's another one that, erectile dysfunction on the part of the male, menopause on the part of the female. There are a number of cases that populate the psychiatric literature of that. Females get older, they hit menopause, their physical appearance declines, husbands get less sexually interested in them, and then all of a sudden they think their partner's going after, weirdly, a young, attractive female. So that's problem number 4. Problem 5, or difficulty 5, is that jealousy embodies error management logic, and a couple people have mentioned that. Randy mentioned it, and Randy Nesse's smoke alarm principle, error management theory. We can happy to chat about that later. I think is a slightly broader formulation of selection pressures that are responsible for creating a host of adaptive biases that are designed to avoid committing the more costly error, even if the number of errors you commit in inference is statistically larger in number. In the aggregate, they're less costly, or whenever there's a cost asymmetry that's recurrent over evolutionary time, we expect an evolved bias, but it's an adaptive bias. And then a last difficulty that I'll note is that I think a key function of jealousy is preventing future infidelity. So in the psychiatric literature, this is the fascinating thing. They do a study, and there are only a couple who have done statistics on it. So a lot of case studies, but a few that have done statistics. They say guys diagnosed with pathological jealousy, and they find 25% of them, turns out their spouses have admitted to committing affairs. Well, we don't know about the other 75%. We don't know how many have hidden the infidelities, and we don't know how many have not committed infidelity, but are thinking about it. And so jealousy is designed to head off infidelities that might not be happening now, but that might exist on the horizon of the relationship. And that may occur without the activation of that jealousy adaptation. So last thing, and I know how many minutes do I have? 2 minutes? Okay, so last thing. So now what about, I don't know if you buy my argument so far, that there's been, to use Jerry Wakefield's phrase, there's been an over pathologizing of what is a properly functioning mechanism. But what about in the cases of extreme violence? And Randy Thornhill also mentioned violence in his talk. Well, Josh Duntley and I have published a paper called The Evolution of Intimate Partner Violence a couple years ago, where we summarized the evidence for even intimate partner violence being functional. And of course, this is not politically correct. It's going to upset a lot of people. I'm amazed I haven't gotten hate mail as a result of it. But it shows specificity of design. And I'll give you just one very quick example. It turns out pregnant women have an above average statistical vulnerability of getting beaten up by their husbands. Okay, turns out that the location of the body blows that the husbands deliver to their pregnant wives happen to be to their abdomen while they are pregnant. Well, this is one piece of evidence that we assemble among maybe 25 other pieces that suggests specificity of design. To deter partner from cheating, deter partner from leaving, undermine partner's self-esteem, which we think is also functional, because to the degree that your self-esteem influences your self-perceived mate value, if you can undermine your partner's self-esteem, then they think, oh, I'm not going to do any better. I'm very fortunate to be with this guy even though he beats me up. So predictors of jealous violence, doesn't want you talking to other men, limits contact, undermines self-esteem, etc. Daly and Wilson have published on that. So, okay, this is, I promise, the very last thing, so then we'll draw a couple of conclusions. So, we found that in our studies, this is with Josh Duntley, studies of homicidal ideation and anti-homicidal ideation, that is, do you think someone might want to be trying to kill you? We found that jealousy populated even these very most violent of emotions, thought processes. So we asked people, we query them, have you ever thought about killing someone else? 91% of men say yes, 84% of women say yes. We say, tell us about it. What were the thoughts? What triggered the thoughts, etc.? This is just one example. He was a very good friend. On my 20th birthday, he told my paranoid fiancée that I had been unfaithful. This was a pack of lies. Then he made a move on her. Classic mate poaching tactic, by the way. You know, I don't think your partner appreciates you. You really need to be with someone better, like me. So how did you think of killing? At first I would break every bone in his body, starting with his fingers and toes, puncture lungs. The men get very graphic about it. They want the rival to suffer before killing them. Here's another one. Now, Kate Moss, she wasn't in our study, but she was the victim of a homicidal ideation by a woman. My boyfriend is always telling me how gorgeous he thinks Kate Moss is. Really, she's just a skinny, drug addict bitch. The method I thought about taking a wire coat hanger and putting it through her eye to make her brain dead. Then I would hang her skinny body up in my closet and show my boyfriend that she isn't so gorgeous after all. So you get a sense of that she's pretty bothered by her boyfriend's attraction to Kate Moss. And then we found again, who do people think about killing? Their intersexual rivals and their romantic partners, and especially mate poachers. Mate poachers, if you're a mate poacher, which many people are, I know no one admits it. I do studies of mate poaching, started with David Schmidt. If you say, have you ever done mate poaching? People go, no, that sounds like a really bad thing. Say, have you ever tried to lure someone out of an existing relationship that they were in for sex or for long-term run? Say, oh yeah, do that all the time. Well, I'm not a mate poacher. Fair enough. And then we also found this sex differences in the activation of homicidal ideation depending on whether it was a sexual infidelity, so relationship ends and sexual infidelity are stronger triggers for men, emotional infidelity and physical abuse, repeated physical abuse, stronger predictors for women of thinking about killing their romantic partners. So, to draw some conclusions here. So anyway, I think, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, and that's why I really appreciate this opportunity, because I'd like to get your input onto that. So I don't know how, I think there are huge difficulties, is what I'm trying to say, with distinguishing normal from pathological jealousy. I think that based on my reading of the psychiatric and clinical literatures, there has been an over-pathologizing of it. Many of the things that are called pathological symptoms, I think, do reflect the proper functioning of this adaptation. And that applies to even to extremes of jealousy involving violence, stalking, which I didn't have a chance to get into, homicidal ideation, etc. So that's it. Thank you. That's it. I was just going to say before we open up for questions that if you're interested in any of my published articles on this, they're all on my lab page. And so you can download the ones like intimate partner violence and all the jealousy papers, etc. So open things up for questions.
Yeah, we have time for nice talk, David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think you're exactly right that it's really difficult to distinguish the pathological state. This whole co-evolutionary arms race is going to end up meaning that guys trying or girls trying to detect an infidelity are going to be doing it on the basis of subtle cues. And I just wanted to point out something that happened in the DSM, and I don't know if anybody else has really noticed it, but it used to say in one of the earlier editions that the pathological jealousy would be is identified by the inferences based on small bits of evidence. And then they had in a parentheses there, e.g., unexplained spots on the sheets.
Right.
And then in the next edition, they eliminated that particular parenthetical because they realized that that may not be such a bad inference after all.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
I would add that there's going to be some cultural variation here with regard to the legitimacy of men beating up the women. And that's going to go along conservative, liberal lines. And so in conservative cultures, you get to, sexual inequality. Men are assumed superior than women. And women are supposed to stand by their man regardless. And that's all conservative values. And so the legitimacy of male violence toward females will be variable across regions. In more conservative areas, you get more legitimacy.
Right. Fair enough. Good point. Yeah, I would also add, I was just thought of this. I've been thinking about parasites since your talk, and another possible evolved function of jealousy. Men don't want to have their wives or partners to have sex with other men because it could be a parasite vector, a disease vector.
You show empirically that the relationship across 50 United States with infectious disease in relation to male homicide lost out. There is a very strong correlation.
Interesting. So we'll have to incorporate parasite thinking and your theory into our future jealousy work. Cool.
We should probably move on.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David.